Welcome to Actual Spinster. My name is Anna Marie. I'm just filming this wrap up, or like the beginning of this wrap up right now, because I think it will be a little while before I can film next, and I kind of just want to talk about these books, especially because one of them I think has made me go a bit insane. But yeah, so this is just like what I've been reading in December, which I would say has been like quite fantasy-ish so far. I mean, maybe following on from my Lord of the Rings reading. I guess I've just been kind of in the mood in terms of like escaping in some way, but also just like it is the time of year that's more fantasy-y for me, and I think in January I'm definitely going to be reading some Terry Pratchett and stuff like that, because I feel like that's what I always do around this time of year, you know? But anyway, the first thing I read was Swords Point by Ellen Kushner, which is a fantasy novel from the 80s, the late 80s I think, and it's queer. It sort of is supposed to have like begun the genre of like fantasy of manners, so a kind of like non-magical or like potentially vaguely magical, but like, you know, a fantasy setting where it's sort of like, it has some of the kind of like social preoccupations that like Regency romances or like social status novels do. And this book is, as you might be able to tell from the title, it's about fencing, like fencing men, and like dueling. That's really the word I was looking for. And so the main characters are involved in some way with like dueling, and basically there's a sort of like, there's almost like a time difference between classes where like the upper class characters who are like aristocratic, they are sort of in like a Regency romance-ish type thing, and then the working class characters, they are sort of in like a Renaissance era kind of thing, or like a Tudorish sort of, partially because of the dueling that they do, or like some of them do, and there are all sorts of quite like specific rules about like rules of engagement in terms of like fighting against people and like challenging people publicly or privately or like whatever. So yeah, it's interesting. I definitely felt like it much more successfully understood like the stakes at play in terms of like Jane Austen. Like if you are looking for kind of like a fantasy Jane Austen type thing, then I would recommend this way over something like Bridgerton, which just doesn't actually understand like Jane Austen's novels in any meaningful way, and then imagines that it is like adding to them by making them sexy or whatever, totally ignoring the like social claims and kind of like understanding of power and marriage and like marriage economy that Jane Austen's books are like about. And you know, yeah, obviously very brilliant. I wouldn't say that I loved Swords Point, but I did enjoy it. I have also heard that there's like a cross-dressing, sword-wielding girl in the next book, because it is a series, but it's not, I don't think they're like directly sequels or anything. So I will be interested in potentially picking that up at some point, but I don't know when. I mean, it was interesting also to read something from the 80s that's fantasy, and I think in the next year I'm going to be trying to do that a bit more. But you know, I thought it was pretty cool that it was, you know, from the 80s and it was just very gay and like very normal about it. It is, I think, one of the books that like doesn't really have homophobia in the world at all. So if that is also something that you're looking for with queer characters in, then I would recommend this for that. The one thing that I really like, that I actively disliked about the book, was the way that it talked about disability or like people's bodies. A couple times somebody had like a disfigurement or a scar, or yeah, they had got some kind of injury in battle that had left a scar, whether that be like they don't have an eye or something, or something maybe a bit less intense than that, and they would be described as like not being whole anymore or something like that, which I didn't like, obviously. I think the like idea that like if you have a scar or a deformity, you're no longer like a whole, your body isn't whole anymore or something, is very weird. And I also felt that some of the tropes around like evil disability stuff was also sort of kind of present. It wasn't super intense, which is one of the reasons why I kind of could deal with it, slash like I think it is quite like a cynical and difficult world, so I didn't feel deeply upset by the representation, even if I didn't particularly like it. The next book I read, I also actually listened to, which I did with Swords Point as well, and that's Spear by Nicola Griffith. And the main reason I read this is because Meanwood, the sequel to Hild, has come out and I couldn't access it. Like, it was published in the UK when I was looking for it, but they like the various bookshops that I live by, like they couldn't get it even though it said it was in print, like all of this annoying stuff. Like I since think I will be able to get it, but I just really wanted to read it then. I still want to read it a lot, but I just like, it was just so annoying and frustrating, and I just had to wait for ages. So what I decided to do was to read one of the Nicola Griffith books that I hadn't read, which is Spear, which is set in a similar-ish kind of time frame, and like it's historical fantasy in a similar way to Hild is. So I felt like it would maybe slightly scratch the like itch that I wanted to read Meanwood. I also sort of was then, because I couldn't access it, I was like, well, maybe I should reread Hild because I read it quite a few years ago, and obviously also it was published in 2013 I think, and then it's been 10 years since, and now the sequel has been published, which is kind of cool. I like that a lot. And yeah, anyway, I'm just very excited about reading that book. But anyway, so I read Spear and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really fantastic book. It's a retelling of like some Arthurian legend, not focused on Arthur, it's focused on another knight, Percival, I want to say. It uses Welsh, I believe, for the names and things like that. And I just really liked it. It's like, it's sort of like Birch, and like, it's just nice, you know. I enjoyed it. It's not a very long story. I think it's kind of like a novella length, but I just really like it. And I like how Nicola Griffith writes. I think she does it with like depth, and she's like good at creating like a vivid world, which obviously maybe part of that is because I have read Hild and then I was sort of already imagining my way into Spear. But they are different, and they are set in different I mean, when is Arthur from? I think Spear must be earlier, right? Than Hild? I don't know. I don't really know how time works, even though I'm like, oh, history's incredible. But yeah, I would really recommend it, especially if you're looking for like a queer woman, like Arthurian legend retelling. It's just really sweet. The next book I read was Intimacies by Katie Kitamura, and I loved this book. It's a quite, you know, a slight book. It doesn't take long to read. In fact, I think it might even be somewhat shorter than Spear, but I could be wrong. But they're definitely around the same length. This is a novel about a translator, basically, or like an interpreter, who works at The Hague at the International Criminal Court. I honestly think the blurb doesn't do a very, like, she's drawn into simmering personal dramas. Her lover, Adrian, is separated from his wife but still entangled in his marriage. Like, it's very, not much happens, and I feel like if I talk about this book and I'm like, oh, I really loved it, people are going to go in with way too high like expectations. But what I think I really liked is that it never ended up giving you proper answers, but it sort of also gave you proper answers. So obviously there's a couple things that do just make it something that I would automatically like, because I love stuff about words and translation, and I just find it really fascinating. And so this is a bit about that. Obviously, like the main character being a translator / interpreter is very interesting. And yeah, I feel like I talked about some stuff in the films video that I made recently about like courts and stuff like that, and making a narrative of violence, and that is what this book is also thinking about. I feel like it's sort of a difficult book to read right now, in the context of the ongoing genocide against Palestinians and also many other people in the world. So in a way it's sort of like, well, it's always going to be relevant, because global conflict based in basically, you know, colonialism and white supremacy and capitalism, those things are, until we dismantle them all, those things are going to like heavily impact people, and heavily impact people in different way, like not in a fair way, you know, like not everybody is impacted equally. There's another way to say that, but I just can't think. In that sense, this book is sort of comforting in one way, because it's dealing with somebody who's dealing with courts that deal with, how many times can I say deal with, people who have committed in some way or another genocides against groups of people, have been are like being tried for whether they are accountable. But most of the time I think that if the court case is going through, it's fairly likely that they have, even if not like sort of legally committed various, like what is called a war crime or a crime against humanity or genocide or something like that. I use quotations not because I don't believe those things sort of would be bad, but just because those are also constructs, and they're also constructs of especially in this sense, there is a dialogue about the fact that this is like The Hague, it's like the sort of Western international court that then takes formerly colonized countries and then sort of does this like, well, you can't deal with, like, you can't do your justice correctly, like we have to take it over. And it's definitely a part of like the neo-colonial control of like things like the United Nations, because obviously if you're trying people for genocide and war crimes, I mean, you should be trying every single president of the United States, or Henry Kissinger, I know he just died, that's why I'm thinking about him, or any number of like Western liberal murderers, mass murderers, who get away with it because they are from the like imperial core, like the Western elite, like whatever. But like obviously that's also not to say that people who are not those people do also commit genocide. So there is a sort of like some thought about that, but not like loads, but you know, it's sort of happening there at the same time. And yeah, I don't know, it's just like about her life and the kind of like about her job and about like her sort of moral or like personal difficulties with that. And then it's also about like a relationship she's sort of in and like her struggles with that. But I don't think any of it like takes sort of primacy, and I guess that's one of the reasons why I found it kind of comforting, because it's like I live in a world where I mean I'm disabled, so I don't leave my house very often, but like I also find it really hard to still have a lot of anxiety about like, I don't know, a video I made or what I should say to a friend, or getting upset that people aren't talking to me about something that I wanted to speak about, but also that I'm like constantly engaging in really horrible discussions or like witnessing of violence, and we all are, and that does also like impact how we respond to things. I feel like I just made that sound really stupid, but yeah, I don't know. If you like books, what I also felt, I will tell you a book maths thing, which is that I felt it was a bit like if The Idiot and Conversations with Friends was one book, because it has the idiot's interest in language, and then it also has the idiot's interest in Europe. Because what I really like is also books that are kind of like a critical love letter to Europe, which is what I would say this is. Like The Idiot is thinking about the way that Europe is constructed, because the main character is Turkish American, and then she goes to like Hungary and she notices the confluence that's not the word I'm looking for, but like the similarities between Hungarian and Turkish, and there are obviously historical reasons for that, but they're like kind of erased, because if people knew those so well, they maybe would stop and question why, like, I don't know, why people think of like Europeanness and like whiteness then as so distinct from like people of colour in like other countries, and obviously also there's like religious stuff that goes in there. So anyway, but those kinds of conversations and like noticing, and then also the experience of being like a person of colour in Europe and how like difficult that is, that's also sort of being thought about in The Idiot. The same with this, and then with Conversations with Friends, I felt like the way that like some of the like love romantic stuff was playing out, and then also Conversations with Friends I think is like a really interesting book politically, even if it sort of also doesn't go far enough, like just is a little bit lip servicey. But like I do think that like there's only so much you can do in a novel, slash I think people are often very critical of novels that include politics in a way that they think is surface level. But I guess I feel like sometimes people make that moral judgment or like that judgment about a book because their own political opinions are quite surface level, so they imagine that every conversation people have in a book about like, I don't know, communism or like whatever has to also sort of be surface level like their conversations. But actually it also just kind of does make sense to be talking about this stuff with your friends in like a very low-key way sometimes, because that is actually what you do if you do believe these things. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. Anyway, there's a lot to be said, that that's a big conversation, but like I enjoyed this, and yeah. Okay, and then this is the book that kind of made me insane. So this is Nona the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. It's the third book in the Locked Tomb series. I think if you don't want to be spoiled for this book, which also would be spoiled for Gideon, the first book, and also Harrowhug, the second book, then you should probably skip ahead to whenever I'm not holding this book up anymore. So like, well, actually you can stay for a bit. First of all, I just tell you that like so I've read all of the books that are out so far in this series, because I do think they're enjoyable and I do think they're trying to do something. I wouldn't say I'm like a #1 fan. I give every book 4 stars. I mean, I would like to reread Gideon to see if I think it should deserve less, because I thought Harrowhark was the best out of Gideon and Harrowhark, and I think I potentially still prefer it to Nona, but I did like this one quite a lot too. But again, I still gave them all 4 stars. Although I think that the problems with Gideon lessen as the series goes on, mainly that there are a lot of annoying meme references in Gideon, and whilst there are still meme references in the other books, they lessen considerably, I would say, and the voice, like the tone, like the humour tone kind of thing, does also change to some degree. Again, it's still kind of there, but it's much less than in Gideon, as far as I remember. But anyway, okay, now I'm going to talk about like spoilers, I guess, in terms of Nona. So I think that like Tamsin Muir has like a sort of formula for how she writes her books, which is, we begin, you don't know what's going on, and the character doesn't really know what's going on, and then they try to figure out what's going on, and then halfway through maybe there's like a kind of reveal thing that totally changes what you thought you had been finding out into something totally different, and then by the end of it there's also sort of another like coming together of stuff which somewhat makes sense and somewhat doesn't. But you also sort of have more of a grasp on it, and then you read the next book and you're immediately thrown into something that you don't understand what is going on, you know? That's sort of the framework. I really liked Nona, but I also did feel like this was the book that I felt very aware of it being created as a book. I also just thought it was really like sad and sort of beautiful about like love and like found families, I guess. I honestly don't know why this made me insane. Like, I don't feel like I have anything to say about it. I did feel like I should have reread Gideon before I read this, because I felt like as opposed to with Harrowhark, like this book was the most connected to Gideon. Like it's almost like Harrow was like a interlude, and then Gideon and Nona could be like more closely together. I guess I just kind of want to talk to people about, like, I want people to talk to me about this. Like, did you like it? What did you think about it? If you have read it, please talk to me. Yeah, there's just like a lot of moving parts. I'm not sure how successful it always is at like sticking the landing in terms of like revealing its mystery or like uncovering its like very sort of like elaborate systems of world building or like religion and like the characters, and then all of these different like political sort of machinations and betrayal and stuff like this. There's like a final bit at the end which was not very convincing, slash like sort of was the only way things could turn out if there was going to be another book. But I do enjoy it. I also really like this cover. I think it's a nice one. I mean, I definitely like this cover better than the other two. Oh yeah, the other thing is, something that I spoke about when I read Gideon for the first time was in terms of like its very sort of specific descriptions of like thinness, and its like reliance on this like, oh well, they're necromancers, so they're all very thin, and you can see their skeleton because they're like skeletons because they're necromancers. Wow. Which was quite uncomfortable to read, and I don't think there are like any fat characters. I will not 100% stake a claim that, but I'm pretty sure there are not any. Or maybe there are some in Gideon, but they're probably not main characters at all. But yeah, I'm pretty sure as the series goes on there's less and less fat characters, because there's more of the like mainstay characters, and none of those characters are fat. But in this, and in Harrow, it's clear that like Harrow has like an eating disorder sort of thing, slash there's a lot of like food related stuff, but it felt much more on purpose, because it was about Harrow having an eating disorder, if that makes sense. Like, so, but yeah, that would be something I would want people to have a heads up about going into reading these. And Nona, even more explicitly I think than Harrow, has a problem with eating food in a way that like, yeah, it could be pretty triggering, I think, to read, and like difficult, and I don't really want to think about that much. So yeah, there's, you know, but again, that's something that I think would be good to know going in. Yeah, I didn't say anything there. I am looking forward to reading Electo the 9th, or whatever it's called, which I think comes out sometime next year. In this edition there is also like an extra story called The Unwanted Guest, which was like, okay, I didn't think it was great. Oh, I didn't even say, but I love Palamedes. I love Camilla and Palamedes a lot. And I was thinking that one of the reasons is I didn't want to stop reading this, but I had some stuff to do, so I listened to, because my library had like 27 out of 28 copies available, So I listened to some of the audiobook, and the audiobook narrator does a like northern accent for Palamedes and Camilla, which maybe made me like them more, but I do really like them. So those are all the things that I've read so far. Two things that I'm currently reading, which I am somewhat hoping to finish this month, is the Journal of Catherine Mansfield, which I am now 64 pages through, making progress. And also the Golden Notebook by Doris Lessing, which I have read about 55 pages of, and I am loving it so far. I wouldn't be super surprised if I didn't finish it in December, but I mean, you just have to keep watching to see. Okay, I think that's like everything. Please talk to me about Nona, and also just the like Tomb series in general. I really would like to reread Gideon with all of the knowledge as well that I now have from reading this and also from reading Harrow, and seeing if it actually does make sense. Yeah, also I really hope that like for Alecto, Tamsin Muir kind of breaks out of this like particular formula of like novel writing that she has, because I think it does, you know, it's fine, it's not like a major problem, but I think for the 4th book in a row for that to sort of be the formula for it would be a shame. And I think she's a better writer now than she was, so I think she can pull off a different format, like structure of a book. Anyway, bye. I'm back to do the rest of my reading wrap up for December. I actually ended up only finishing one more book. I did make some progress on some of the books I was reading, and I think I also probably started another one, but I'll talk about that later. Yeah, it was partially because I just ended up having less time for reading, but I read this whilst I was in New York, so it felt very cool to be doing that. And it was a really, really enjoyable book, so it was a great like reading end to the year. So the final book I read was Everything for Everyone, An Oral History of the New York Commune 2052 to 2072 by M.E. O'Brien and Eman Abdelhadi. And basically, like, this book, in a way, this book feels kind of indulgent because it doesn't like skirt over like the violence that will happen in the future, but it also is kind of this like very wonderful fantasy about the future and like about what's going to happen. So basically, this is sort of like a speculative fiction novel that is pretending to be a collection of like oral history, basically, of like interviews with people who participated in the like founding in various different aspects of like the New York Commune, which there are lots of different communes like in New York, and we do get like perspectives from people like all around in various different ways, and we also get a little bit of insight into the like global kind of like deterioration of capitalism, but definitely much less so. Like, it is much more focused on like the New York Commune. There's one chapter or like interview where the the liberation of the Levant, including Palestine, is talked about, and obviously that's like an especially moving and like wonderful chapter to read right now, if also kind of difficult because like it does reckon with the like violence of, you know, settler colonialism and how it's not just gonna all be okay immediately. There is a struggle involved, and also there are so many people already dead. Yeah, so I think like I really did enjoy this. I would say I do think that Africa, like what was going on in the continent of Africa, was a bit like hazy, and I wish there had maybe been, like, again, it wouldn't have to have gone into detail because this isn't about that, it's about like the New York Commune, but I just felt like whereas we get a little bit of insight into what's happening in like South America, I think one of the first communes was in Peru, I want to say, and then also there's like this new technological development happening in Quito, I want to say. That felt, even if it wasn't like fleshed out massively, it was still part of the story, whereas with Africa I don't know what they were envisioning would happen there. They just kind of like did leave it a little bit. Obviously, I guess like the Levant kind of goes, there is a bit of stuff I think about Egypt. Yeah, they're definitely not in the way, and it wasn't like referenced in the way that the other places were. But other than that, yeah, it's really wonderful. So it is written as interviews, and the authors each kind of take it in turns to be leading the interview. And there's also like an introduction, which is like sort of a little, so it's sort of like academic-y, because the people who wrote this, I think they talk about meeting in like grad school or whatever, and then going on to maintain friendships and make this collection, and it's like being produced on the 20th anniversary of the founding of the New York Commune. And yeah, they just kind of talk about different aspects of life, different aspects of like how the revolution happened. Oh, and I didn't realise this because I didn't go back to this, but there is a map, which is really useful. There's, you know, a lot about like revolutionary militancy, there's about organising free assemblies, there's about student and worker occupations, there's about healthcare, there's about like refugees and sort of like making refuge is how it's read, as said here. There's also a chapter about like very intense cult, which was very intense, but you know, it's okay in the end, like it doesn't leave it horrible. There's talk about technological advancement and like space. There's talk about war as well. There's talk about gestation work, although actually surprisingly I found that one to be the least fleshed out. I felt like it was actually much briefer than a lot of the other like sections, but maybe that's because the ideas about family abolition are like wending their way throughout the whole collection. There's one about ecological restoration, but also grief, and also AI. I really like that bit. There's one just about growing up, like coming of age and stuff, and there's another one kind of more about like history and how it's being considered, and like, oh wait, that one's the one about AI, I think, actually, a little bit. Anyway, so yeah, it's just really, really wonderful. And you know, I didn't like 100%, you know, agree with how the future would look like. I didn't like 100% love like some of the stuff, but the point is, whatever. Anyway, it's really lovely. I would really, really recommend it. Definitely like a way to have hope that is kind of tempered, and also like a really just nourishing and refreshing read, honestly, if you just want to like have a little bit of like pep in your step about, you know what, the future. It has so many multitudes in it. It has so many wonderful people in it, and amazing, beautiful times and moments and events and relationships, and it's gonna happen eventually. So yeah, that's everything I read in December. Let me know if you've read any of these books. I hope you're having a nice day when you're watching this, and yeah, I'll see you when I next see you. Bye.